All that regular teengers have to worry about is prom and being the cool kid at school. But what happens when some of them choose a different, much darker path?
Down those 4 general sessions for late charges.
Sometimes it can even get as bad as stabbing a victim over 100 times or murdering a toddler. But when the consequences of their actions come, they completely lose control. These are the court reactions of some of the deadliest teens in history.
Apologize for my behaviors. Please don't take my life from me.
T.J. Lane. 19-year-old T.J. Lane is considered one of the most notorious offenders in recent history, as he was involved in a horrifying act of violence that claimed the lives of 3 students. The tragic event happened on what seemed to be a normal day in February 2012 at Shawn High School. He fired 10 shots at a group of students.
In all, 5 people were shot, 3 fatally, before Lane turned himself in,
taking the lives of 3 and leaving 3 other students wounded. When authorities located and attempted to arrest Lane, he did not resist or try to flee. He calmly waited to be cuffed and taken into custody. Till today, it isn't clear why he did what he did, or what connection he had to the school and the victims. When his defense team pointed to evidence of psychosis and hallucinations, which could indicate severe mental health struggles, the court refused it and found Lane competent to stand trial as an adult. Lane's behavior throughout the legal proceedings was also strange. He continuously displayed lack of remorse, smirking and smiling even as relatives of the victims shared their pain and grief during the trial. And when his sentence finally came, his reaction was unbelievable. But that's not even the crazy part. After being convicted and sentenced to life in prison for his crimes, he escaped from prison in the state of Ohio. However, authorities found him shortly after. Lane sure is a psycho killer, but wait till you meet Fui. Aiden Fui.
Convicted teen killer Aiden Fui was booked into prison after receiving a life sentence for the murder of 13-year-old Tristan Bailey.
The body of Tristan Bailey, a 13-year-old girl, was tragically discovered on May 9, 2021. Her family had reported her missing earlier that day, and just hours later, the devastating news came to light. Tristan had been brutally attacked, and she suffered several stab and slash wounds over and over again. The prime offender to this horrible crime was Aiden Fui, and Tristan was just an unfortunate victim of a murderer on the prowl. After enough evidence was gathered against him, Aiden Fui, who was only 14 years old at the time, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in connection with the poor girl's death.
We're having fun in a cop car.
Yep.
Fui, whose full name is Aiden Shawn Fui, was a fellow student at Patriot Oaks Academy and lived in the same neighborhood as Tristan. According to statements from his girlfriend and other friends, Fui often spoke about wanting to kill people. Once, he even described a plan where he would drag a random person into the woods and stab them. His actions were so premeditated that when he was in the interrogation room with his parents, he showed no sign of remorse. On the night of Tristan's death, Fui reportedly asked a mutual friend for her phone number. He then persuaded Tristan to leave her home and meet up with him at a friend's house. Surveillance footage from a nearby residence then captured 2 individuals, believed to be Fui and Tristan, walking together along Saddlestone Drive. The area is close to where Tristan's body was later found, near the edge of a retention pond. The footage showed the pair heading eastward, but about an hour and 45 minutes later, Fui was seen running home alone, and this time, he was carrying his shoes in his hands. The autopsy report eventually revealed that she had suffered 114 stab and cutting wounds. These injuries were concentrated on her head, neck, shoulders, arms, hands, and back.
Tristan Bailey, she suffered a painful, horrifying death from someone that she trusted.
However, his sentence had very little effect on him, and he showed absolutely no sign of remorse. But much worse is the horror of knowing you can't really trust anyone, even your closest friends. Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf.
Rachel Schoaf, one of Skylar Neese's killers, was up for her first parole hearing today.
Skylar Annette Neese was brutally murdered by two people who she trusted the most, her high school friends, Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy, who were both just 16 years old. Skylar disappeared from her home in Star City, West Virginia, around midnight on July 6, 2012, and for 6 long months, Skylar's whereabouts were unknown. Unfortunately, her body was finally discovered in January 2013, just across the state line in Wayne Township, Greene County, Pennsylvania.
Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf carried out that plan. Together they stabbed and killed Skylar.
How did she even go missing in the first place? On the evening of July 5th, 2012, Skylar returned to her family's apartment in Star City, West Virginia, after completing her work shift at Wendy's. Everything seemed normal until the early hours of July 6th. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex showed Skylar climbing out of her bedroom window at 12:30 a.m. and getting into a sedan with her supposed friends, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. It seemed as though she was sneaking out of the house to go out, and her father, David Neese, later shared that Skylar had left her window open, hadn't taken her cell phone charger, and had clearly intended to come back home. For 6 months, her family searched frantically for her, and it wasn't until January 3rd, 2013, that Rachel Schoaf broke her silence. She confessed to plotting Skylar's murder alongside Sheila Eddy, and their motives were simple. In her words, she and Sheila didn't like her and didn't want to be friends with her anymore. In fact, Skylar's dad shared that the girls had even helped distribute missing person flyers after his daughter's disappearance. After her confession, Rachel Schoaf led investigators to the site where Skylar's body had been left. And on March 13, 2013, attorney William J. Ehlenfeld issued a press release confirming that the remains were indeed those of Skylar Neese.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if there's a proper way to make this apology because there are not even words to describe the guilt and remorse.
While Schoaf will be eligible for parole after 10 years, Sheila Eddy, on the other hand, was given a more serious sentence. Hopefully, the girls learnt their lessons in jail.
Rachel Schoaf, it is a sentence of the court that you be imprisoned in the West Virginia State Penitentiary for a period of 30 years.
And we could say the same for McKenzie, who murdered someone she claimed to love. McKenzie Shilla. 17-year-old McKenzie Shilla was found guilty of 12 serious charges, including 4 counts of murder, after intentionally crashing her car at a speed of 100 miles per hour in Strongsville, Ohio, in July 2022.
McKenzie Shilla murdered Dom and Davion in cold blood and had already moved on.
This devastating crash resulted in the deaths of her 20-year-old boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his 19-year-old friend, Davian Flanagan, who were both passengers in the vehicle at the time. According to members of Dominic Russo's family, McKenzie Shilla and Russo had been in a relationship for 3 to 4 years before the crash. They shared a really close bond, and Shilla had reportedly spent much of their relationship living with Russo at his family's home. However, Russo's mother herself testified during the trial and shared that the relationship between her son, Dominic Russo, and McKenzie Shilla was often rocky.
There's no fix put in this case, as the Shrillas would like to proclaim.
She explained that the couple usually argued, and their fights sometimes escalated to the point where threats were made. Dominic's brother, Angelo, also testified that the couple had a pattern of breaking up and getting back together. One particularly alarming incident occurred on July 17, 2022, just 2 weeks before the tragic crash. Shilla was driving with Russo as a passenger when an argument broke out between them. Upset during the disagreement, Shilla threatened to crash the car. Russo became so concerned that he called his mother and asked her to come pick him up. However, one of his friends ended up stepping in to help instead. While on the phone with Russo, the friend overheard Shilla making a frightening statement. She said, "I will crash this car right now." When the friend arrived to pick up Dominic Russo, he found McKenzie Shilla's car pulled over on the side of the road with the passenger side door open. As he approached, he witnessed Shilla striking Dominic with both of her hands in an aggressive manner. Dominic eventually got out of the car and stormed away from the scene. In fact, after that incident, Dominic did not feel comfortable allowing Shilla into his home. Despite his efforts to calm her down, she refused to listen. Shilla became agitated and began banging on the door of the house, demanding to be let inside. Her behavior escalated as she resorted to shouting inappropriate names at him, and at this point, Dominic began to record the scene with his phone. She also made verbal threats to damage his property, including keying his car and breaking off the door handle if he didn't let her in. Feeling overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, Dominic stopped recording the incident and called his mother for help. Now, the prosecutors claimed that Shilla's actions on the day of the crash were not intentional. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence that painted a completely different picture. Security footage of the crash was shown in the courtroom, and they could see Shilla's vehicle speeding down the street before crashing with great force into a building, with no indication that she had attempted to slow down or stop the car. A certified forensic mechanic also testified during the trial and explained what the vehicle's event data recorder revealed. According to the data, moments before the crash, the accelerator pedal had been pressed all the way down to full capacity, and there was no application of the brake at any point. In the end, the court found Shilla guilty, and she was sentenced to the maximum penalty, life in prison. She will not be eligible for parole for 32 years. And based on her demeanor in previous court proceedings, no one expected her reaction on this day. And now, our subscriber pick. Subscriber pick. This disturbing image shows a young offender who was supposedly shot in the eye by an official. According to News Online, he went into a fit of rage after being sentenced to 169 years in prison. Wild story, right? But what if this picture isn't real at all? With tools like AI, anything can look believable. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments section. Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale. On November 3rd, 2021, the body of 66-year-old high school teacher Nohema Graber was tragically discovered in Chautauqua Park, located in Fairfield, Iowa. Her body was found just hours after she had been reported missing. The teacher's remains were hidden under a tarp, a wheelbarrow, and several railroad ties, and investigators determined that she had suffered significant trauma to the head. It was obvious that whoever did this really wanted her dead. Just 2 days after Nohema Graber's body was discovered, police announced the arrests of 2 teenage suspects.
2 17-year-old students, Chaden Miller and Jeremy Goodale, have been charged with ambushing and murdering her.
16-year-old Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale, who were students at the high school where Graber taught. Initially, Willard Miller denied having any involvement in the disappearance and death of his teacher. However, he later changed his statement, admitting that he knew everything that had happened. On the day of her tragic death, the other suspect, Nohema Graber, followed her usual routine on the day of her death. After finishing her work at school, she drove to Chautauqua Park, where she often went for her daily walk. She arrived at the park and left her vehicle in the parking lot around 4 p.m. At some point during her walk, the two teenagers, Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale,
"It is a complete travesty to have two young people deliberately take the life of Nohema Graber away,"
ambushed her. The boys then attempted to remove any evidence of their involvement, and obviously, that failed. Investigators uncovered evidence from Jeremy Goodale's Snapchat history, which was brought to their attention by a witness who knew the teens and had access to the messages. In these Snapchat conversations, it was revealed that the two teens had been actively involved in planning the attack, carrying it out, and attempting to cover up their involvement afterward. The legal proceedings for the two teens unfolded separately. Willard Miller was the first to be sentenced, but before that, he tendered a not-so-sincere apology. Miller received a sentence of life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Months later, Jeremy Goodale faced his own sentencing. He, too, was sentenced to life in prison, though he will be eligible for parole after 25. And given the gravity of his offense, his reaction was quite surprising. At least, none of these boys made a court scene. The arrogance and violence of this next teenager might put you on edge. Shawn Del Jackson. At just 18 years old, Shawn Del Jackson was arrested and charged with the murder of Nathan Potter, a crime that took place during the course of a robbery in River West. Potter was a 21-year-old film student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, tragically lost his life in the early hours of July 6th.
A hope dashed by Judge Rebecca Dallett, who gave him life without parole.
He was shot once while walking to his apartment in the 2500 block of North Dooceman Street, just a couple of blocks from home. Although Jackson first denied his involvement in the crime, prosecutors say that Derek J. Thomas, another suspect in the case, confessed to police that 18-year-old Jackson shot Potter because the young student had no money during an attempted robbery. Apparently, the scene unfolded near the Gig Tavern just a few meters away, where bartender Kevin Haag was working that night. Shortly after 1 a.m., someone rushed in to inform him that a person had been shot outside. Hager hurried to the scene and was shocked to find that the victim was Potter, his neighbor who lived in the same building. Acting quickly, Haig grabbed bar towels and pressed them against Potter's gunshot wound in an attempt to stop the bleeding until paramedics arrived. Jackson, on the other hand, fled to Mississippi the day after the killing, but was eventually tracked down and arrested in September after his uncle turned him in. When he finally appears in court for the proceedings, he puts up an arrogant attitude and is even seen smiling at the victim's family,
making gestures toward the Potter family as though he enjoyed rubbing it in their faces.
He eventually faced the charges for Potter's death, the non-fatal shooting of another man just 12 hours later, and armed robbery. However, his sentencing did not go well, as Shawn Del showed the world just how violent he can get. Even his family makes inappropriate comments to Potter's family, and the entire courtroom is shocked. What a roller coaster that must have been. Now let's hear Martis Fuller's story and how he swears that he didn't commit the crimes brought forward against him. Martis Fuller. 18-year-old Martis Fuller was found guilty by a jury in March for the tragic shooting and killing of his 15-year-old ex-girlfriend, Kaylee Juga, as well as for wounding her mother, Stephanie Juga. According to the prosecution, Fuller harbored resentment toward Kaylee and her mother, blaming them for his expulsion from school and subsequent removal from the football team. On the afternoon of May 9th, 2019, shortly after returning home from school, mother Stephanie Juga and her 15-year-old daughter, Kaylee Juga, were upstairs in their home, preparing for an upcoming camping trip. Fuller, with a clear understanding of the layout of the Juga home and the family's routine, took advantage of the situation. He snuck into the home through an open garage and caught the mother and daughter off guard. Once he was inside, Fuller went straight to his targets. Kaylee, who was upstairs in her room, was shot 5 times in an attack that left her with fatal injuries. She died at the scene of the shooting. Meanwhile, her mother Stephanie, who had been upstairs with her daughter, was confronted by Fuller on the 2nd floor of the house. As she attempted to escape and hide, she was shot as well. Despite the pain and fear she experienced, Stephanie was able to later identify Fuller as the person who had attacked her and her daughter. During the trial, witnesses for the prosecution painted a disturbing picture of Martis Fuller's obsession with Kaylee Juga, and it became clear that this obsession had escalated over time. He had a history of bullying her at school and also harassing her outside of school, including at her place of work and even at her home. Now, when the prosecuting side gathered evidence, they found that Fuller, who was just 15 years old at the time of the crime, carefully planned his actions. Fuller pleaded not guilty, but with all the evidence against him. The jury disagreed with him. Fuller was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of supervised release for the murder of Kaylee Juga. In addition to this, Fuller was also sentenced for the attempted murder of Stephanie Juga and the burglary charges related to the home invasion, meaning Fuller would face additional time for these crimes on top of his life sentence. Although he drafted out a statement to be read out by his attorney, the weight of these sentences didn't seem to have any effect on him.
But more importantly, the loss of my ex-girlfriend Kaylee, that I loved too.
Now, we see Dylan, who murdered a helpless toddler. His reaction in court is unbelievable. Dylan Schumacher. Dylan Schumacher, who was just 16 years old at the time, lived with his mother, his 19-year-old girlfriend, Ashley Smith, and Ashley's 2 young children, 23-month-old Austin and 2-month-old Christopher. Although Dylan had taken on a fatherly role for Ashley's children, he was not the biological father of either Austin or Christopher. On March 19, 2013, at around 4:20 p.m., Ashley left her home to go to work at her job at Pizza Hut, leaving her 2 children under Dylan's care. For the next few hours, everything seemed relatively normal, or so it appeared. Dylan was supposed to watch the 2 young children, while Ashley went about her day at work. However, at approximately 8:20 p.m. that same evening, Dylan made a 911 call that changed everything.
Springville has been found guilty of killing his girlfriend's little son.
He reported that one of the children, Austin, was unresponsive and in need of immediate medical attention. Paramedics were quickly dispatched to the scene, but by the time they arrived, it was already too late. Austin was rushed to the hospital, but doctors could not save him. However, the circumstances surrounding Austin's death raised suspicions, and authorities began to look into what had happened that evening. As the investigation continued, it was revealed that there were signs that indicated the child's injuries were not accidental. Here's what happened. Upon arriving at the scene, Deputy Pisa immediately ran past Dylan Schumacher and his mother, who were both standing on the porch of the house, anxious and obviously distressed. The deputy rushed to an upstairs bedroom where he found Austin lying on a bed. The young child was in a severe condition, bleeding from his mouth, and had large bruises on both sides of his face. Austin's pupils were dilated, indicating a possible head injury or trauma, and there was no sign of a pulse. As Deputy Pisa was carrying Austin out of the house, he overheard Dylan Schumacher, who was standing on the porch, saying to himself, "Oh my God, she's going to kill me." Another deputy, Deputy Bouton, who was also on the scene, overheard Schumacher making another remark saying, "I can't believe I did this," and "Oh my God, I didn't mean for this to happen." At this moment, they realized that surely Dylan knew something that they didn't. Deputy Pisa then had no choice but to transport Schumacher to the local police substation in his patrol car. Once he was in custody, County Sheriff's Department Deputy Graham approached Schumacher and asked if they could speak in private. Once inside the conference room, Detective Graham informed Schumacher of his legal status. He told the teenager that he was officially under arrest and that he was not free to leave the premises. Now, during the court proceedings, investigators lay hold on audio evidence in the form of a call between Schumacher and his mum, where he made a strange comment. Still, he insists that it was not his intention to take the boy's life, and the court eventually passes his sentences, which he reacts to in a rather strange manner. Hopefully, he never gets to hurt anyone ever again. Thanks for watching. If you found these reactions as shocking as we did, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more content like this. See you in the next video.